In 1922, a new state was born out of revolution, war, and chaos. A state that promised equality, but delivered control. A state that defeated Hitler, but terrified its own citizens. A state that reached the stars, while its people stood in breadlines. This was the story of the Soviet Union, a superpower that lasted just 69 years, yet shaped the entire modern world. And the question remains, how did something so powerful collapse so completely? To understand that, we need to go back to the beginning. But before we get into the story, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss future deep dive documentaries like this. If you enjoy uncovering hidden history and how the world really works, you're in the right place. Now, let's begin. At the start of the 20th century, Russia was one of the largest empires on Earth, but size meant nothing. Most of its population lived in poverty. Peasants worked land they did not own. Factories were overcrowded and dangerous. And at the top, Tsar Nicholas II ruled with absolute authority. But pressure was building. Industrial strikes spread across cities. Military failures weakened the empire. And then came the breaking point, World War I. Russia entered the war unprepared. Millions of soldiers were sent to the front with outdated weapons and little training. They died in staggering numbers. Back home, food shortages began. Inflation spiraled and trust in the monarchy collapsed completely. The empire was cracking, and inside that crack, revolution was forming. In 1917, everything changed. Workers and soldiers began revolting in the streets of Petrograd. Strikes shut down factories. The army refused to fire on civilians. The government could no longer function. Then came the Bolsheviks. Led by Vladimir Lenin, they promised something radical. No more czars, no more aristocracy, land for the peasants, power to the workers. And for millions suffering under war and poverty, that message was powerful. In October 1917, the Bolsheviks seized power. The Russian government collapsed almost overnight. But taking power was easy. Keeping it would be war. After the revolution, Russia exploded into civil war. On one side were the Bolsheviks, the Red Army. On the other were anti-communist forces, the Whites. Foreign powers also intervened, trying to stop the revolution from spreading. The country descended into chaos. Millions died from fighting, famine, and disease. Entire regions were destroyed. But slowly, the Bolsheviks gained control. Their discipline was stronger, their organization more effective, and their leadership more ruthless. By 1922, the war ended. The Bolsheviks had won, and in the ruins of the Russian Empire, a new state was formed, the Soviet Union, a one-party communist state unlike anything the world had seen. But the question remained, who would control it? The first leader was Vladimir Lenin. He believed the state should control all major industries. Private property was reduced, factories were nationalized, and political opposition was eliminated. But the economy was collapsing under war and mismanagement. So Lenin introduced a surprising policy, the New Economic Policy, NEP. It allowed small private businesses to operate again. Markets reopened slightly, and the economy stabilized. But Lenin would not live long enough to see his system mature. In 1924, he died, and a power struggle began, one that would define the Soviet Union for decades. After Lenin's death, multiple leaders competed for control, but one man outmaneuvered them all, Joseph Stalin, quiet, strategic, and ruthless. Stalin was not Lenin's chosen successor in spirit, but he controlled the party machinery, and that mattered more than ideology. By the late 1920s, Stalin had eliminated his rivals. He became the undisputed leader of the Soviet Union, and now he would reshape the country completely. Stalin believed the USSR needed rapid industrialization to survive. He launched 5-year plans. Factories were built at extreme speed. Steel production skyrocketed, but the cost was enormous. Agriculture was forcibly collectivized. Peasants were forced onto state-run farms. Resistance was punished harshly. In Ukraine, this policy contributed to mass famine. Millions died in what is now known as the Holodomor. At the same time, Stalin built a system of surveillance and terror. The state began monitoring its own people, and no one, not even party officials, was safe. By the mid-1930s, paranoia consumed the Soviet leadership. Stalin believed enemies were everywhere, inside the party, inside the military, even inside families. This led to one of the darkest periods in Soviet history, the Great Purge. Hundreds of thousands were arrested, many were executed, others were sent to labor camps known as the Gulag. The country was being reshaped through fear, but outside the USSR, an even greater storm was forming, a war that would change everything. In Europe, tensions were rising, Germany was rearming, fascism was spreading, and another global conflict was approaching. The Soviet Union, despite its internal terror, was about to be tested on an unimaginable scale, because in 1941, Nazi Germany would invade, and everything would change. This is where we pause, because from this point forward, the story shifts from internal revolution to global war, superpower status, Cold War escalation, space race, collapse, and the fall of the Berlin Wall. On June 22, 1941, everything changed. Nazi Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest invasion in human history. The Soviet Union, despite its size, was unprepared. Entire Soviet armies were encircled within weeks. Cities burned, villages were wiped out, and millions of civilians were trapped behind advancing German forces. But what followed was not collapse. It was survival through sheer force of will. Joseph Stalin, once feared by his own people, now became the face of national resistance. Factories were moved east beyond the Ural Mountains. Entire industries were rebuilt in months, and the Soviet war machine began to adapt. One city became the symbol of everything: Stalingrad. The battle for Stalingrad was not just military, it was psychological. Street by street, building by building, the city turned into ruins. Soldiers fought for control of single staircases, single rooms, even single walls. Temperatures dropped below freezing. Supplies ran out, but neither side backed down. The Germans believed victory was inevitable. The Soviets believed retreat meant annihilation. Then, in 1943, the turning point came. The Soviet counteroffensive encircled the German Sixth Army. Hundreds of thousands were trapped. Starvation followed. Surrender came shortly after. Stalingrad became the moment the war shifted. From that point on, Germany began to retreat. But victory came at a devastating cost. Entire cities across the USSR were destroyed, and over 20 million Soviet citizens would ultimately die in the war. Yet out of destruction, a superpower was born. By 1945, Soviet troops entered Berlin. The Nazi regime collapsed. World War II ended, but the world that emerged was no longer united. It split into two opposing systems. The United States and its allies promoted capitalism and democracy. The Soviet Union promoted communism and state control. And between them, a new conflict began, not a direct war, but something more dangerous: the Cold War. After World War II, the Soviet Union consolidated control over Eastern Europe. Countries like Poland, Hungary, East Germany, and Czechoslovakia became communist-aligned states. These nations were not fully independent. They followed Moscow's direction. Winston Churchill famously called this division the Iron Curtain. Europe was now split in two: West versus East, capitalism versus communism, and neither side trusted the other. Then came the most dangerous development in human history: nuclear weapons. The United States developed the atomic bomb first, but by 1949, the Soviet Union tested its own. Now both sides had the ability to destroy the world, and neither was willing to back down. The 1950s were defined by fear. Fear of spies, fear of invasion, fear of nuclear war. Both the United States and the Soviet Union expanded their military power. The arms race began. So did the space race. The USSR made an early breakthrough in 1957. Sputnik 1 was launched into orbit. The world was stunned. A Soviet satellite had reached space before America. Then, in 1961, another milestone. Yuri Gagarin became the first human in space. For a moment, the Soviet Union appeared unstoppable. But behind the achievements, cracks were forming. After Stalin's death in 1953, a power struggle ended with Nikita Khrushchev taking control. Unlike Stalin, Khrushchev criticized past repression. He exposed Stalin's crimes in what became known as the secret speech. This began a period of reform called de-Stalinization. Censorship loosened, political fear slightly decreased, but the system remained authoritarian. Then came one of the most dangerous moments in history: the Cuban Missile Crisis. In 1962, the Soviet Union placed nuclear missiles in Cuba. The United States discovered them. For 13 days, the world stood on the edge of nuclear war. At the last moment, both sides stepped back, but trust was gone. Khrushchev's leadership was now seen as unstable, and in 1964, he was removed from power. Leonid Brezhnev took control in 1964. Under his rule, the Soviet Union became more stable, but also more stagnant. Economic growth slowed. Innovation declined. Corruption increased. But military spending expanded massively. The USSR maintained global influence, but internally, the system was aging. Then came a major mistake. In 1979, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. What was expected to be a quick intervention turned into a long, draining war. It would last 10 years, and it would bleed the Soviet economy dry. Soldiers returned home disillusioned, resources were stretched thin, and public frustration quietly grew. The system was weakening from within. After Brezhnev died in 1982, two leaders followed in quick succession: Yuri Andropov and Konstantin Chernenko. Both were elderly and ill. Neither could reform the system. Neither could stop decline. The Soviet Union was now visibly aging, and change was inevitable. The Soviet Union is now a Cold War superpower, economically stagnating, politically rigid, militarily overextended, led by aging leadership. By 1985, the Soviet Union was exhausted. The economy was slowing, factories were inefficient, consumer goods were scarce, and trust in leadership was fading. Then a new leader took control. His name was Mikhail Gorbachev. Unlike his predecessors, he was younger, more modern, and aware that the system was breaking down. But what he tried to do next would not save the Soviet Union. It would accelerate its collapse. Gorbachev introduced two major policies: glasnost, openness; perestroika, restructuring. On paper, they were designed to strengthen the USSR. In reality, they exposed its deepest flaws. Glasnost meant less censorship, more freedom of speech, more media transparency. For the first time, Soviet citizens could openly discuss government failure. And what they discovered shocked them. Corruption was widespread, the economy was weaker than admitted, and disasters had been hidden for years. Then came the moment that broke trust completely. In April 1986, disaster struck. At the Chernobyl disaster, a nuclear reactor exploded. Radiation spread across Ukraine, Belarus, and beyond. But the Soviet government delayed informing the public. People continued their daily lives as radiation levels rose. Children played outside. Events continued. By the time evacuations began, it was too late for many. When the truth finally emerged under glasnost, something broke inside the Soviet public. It was no longer just about economic failure, it was about betrayal. Perestroika aimed to reform the economy by introducing limited market mechanisms. But the system was too rigid to adapt. Instead of improving supply, shortages worsened. Prices became unstable. Factories struggled to adjust. And everyday life became harder. For many citizens, the message became clear. Reform was not saving the USSR, it was exposing its collapse. By 1989, the Soviet grip on Eastern Europe was weakening rapidly. Communist governments that had lasted decades began to fall one by one. Poland held semi-free elections. Hungary opened its borders. Czechoslovakia saw mass protests. Romania erupted into violent revolution. But the most powerful symbol came from Germany. The Berlin Wall was breached. People climbed the wall. Borders opened. And for the first time in decades, East and West Germany began to reunite. The Iron Curtain was disappearing, and the Soviet Union did nothing to stop it. That silence was historic. It showed the world something had changed. The USSR was no longer in control of its empire. As Eastern Europe broke away, internal Soviet republics began demanding independence. Lithuania was first to declare sovereignty, then Latvia, then Estonia. Ukraine soon followed with independence movements of its own. Inside the Soviet Union, unity was collapsing, and Moscow's authority was weakening. Gorbachev tried to hold the system together, but every attempt created more resistance. The structure was now cracking from every direction. In August 1991, hardline members of the Communist Party made their move. They attempted a coup to remove Gorbachev and restore full central control. Tanks entered Moscow. Television broadcasts were cut. The Soviet Union seemed on the verge of military takeover, but something unexpected happened. Public resistance formed quickly, and a key figure emerged, Boris Yeltsin. Standing on top of a tank, he openly defied the coup leaders. His image spread across the world. The coup collapsed within days, but the damage was irreversible. The Communist Party had lost its final authority. After the failed coup, republics rapidly declared independence. One by one, they left the Union. The central government had no power to stop them. Economy, politics, and military control were all dissolving at once. Gorbachev now presided over a country that no longer existed in practice. On December 25, 1991, he made a final announcement. He resigned as president of the Soviet Union. That night, the Soviet flag was lowered from the Kremlin for the last time. The USSR was officially dissolved, and the world entered a new era. The Soviet Union left behind a complicated legacy. On one hand, it had defeated Nazi Germany, become a global superpower, reached space before the United States, shaped 20th century geopolitics. But on the other hand, it had also left political repression, economic inefficiency, millions of deaths from war, famine, and purges, a system built on fear and control. For many citizens, the collapse brought relief. For others, it brought chaos. Economies collapsed, prices skyrocketed, and new political systems struggled to form. The transition was not smooth, but the Soviet Union itself was gone forever. The Cold War was not a single battle. It was a 45-year global standoff between two systems, capitalism and communism, the United States and the Soviet Union. And when one collapsed, the entire global order shifted. Some say it was inevitable. Others say it was preventable. But one truth remains. The Soviet Union did not fall in a single moment. It fell through decades of pressure, reform, war, and internal contradiction. And when it finally collapsed, It did so quietly. No final battle, no dramatic ending, just a flag being lowered over Moscow. The Soviet Union lasted from 1922 to 1991, 70 years that changed the world forever. And even today, its influence is still felt in global politics, borders, and history itself. If history teaches us anything, it's that no empire lasts forever. If you enjoyed this journey through the rise and fall of the Soviet Union, make sure to like the video, subscribe for more deep dive history documentaries, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story from the past that shaped our world.